Hey, folks, welcome to the Ultra Catalyst podcast. You know me, I'm your host, Steven. Today, we're going to do a quick recap of the 70.3 Chattanooga Ironman we participated in just a week ago. Now, as you can see, we're wearing our Ironman hat from the race, but man, let me tell you about how this race went. First and foremost, for anyone that's interested to get into triathlons or ultra running, please reach out. Love to help you. We could build custom plans and programs to get you in the right physical and mental shape to be able to complete and cross the finish line of those events. Always happy to help. There's a lot of things that people can learn or will need to learn and at least need to know about training and participating in one of these events. Now, my journey into triathlon started about 3.5, 4 years ago. And believe me, when I first started, my mentality was muscle through everything. And believe me, I worked extremely hard, physically hard, and tortured mentally just to cross the finish line. And there was some races where the conditions and the lack of preparation worked against me, and I was not able to complete those races. But so far in 4 years, I have systematically built different things into my training programs that have caused me, or I should say, that have resulted in me setting personal best in every event, as well as in the overall times at whether if it's a 70.3 or the 140.6 Ironman, which is a half Ironman and a full Ironman. So depending on which distance. So let's talk about Chattanooga. First and foremost, I love going to Chattanooga. The people, the culture, the historical significance, just the environment when you're down there, it's so welcoming. You could meet just about anybody walking in the downtown that's not even there for triathlon. People are friendly. People are open to talk. And there's just something about just being there, whether if it's in May or in September or even other times you may go down there. Chattanooga is definitely high on my list of places that I like going to visit at least once a year. And I have over the last 3 years. And you can see in this picture right behind me here, that's the Ironman full distance finish in 2021, I believe. First time I did an Ironman, a full length Ironman with my brother. It was the first time that he finished his first full. That was my second full finish. But we had tried other ones in the past, just didn't make it. Anyways, man, getting there, piece of cake, flew into Nashville. It's about a 2.5 hour drive, depending on traffic, to get down to Chattanooga. But man, just the environment along the river, it's phenomenal. You got a river that really runs through most of the downtown. You're going to be swimming in a downstream river. For the half, it is a 1.4 mile swim. Traditionally, it's 1.2 mile, but based on where they have docks as well as the speed of the current, because it is a downriver swim or down current swim, they extended the distance in the swim just a little bit. 0.2 is not that far in terms of the pool. If you're training in a pool or if you're in open water, it's not that much farther than the 1.2. Now, as you line up for the swim, you are basically in a park type setting, right? You're on a path. There's thousands of people walking by you here and there. I mean, well, maybe not at one time because they're all stretched in a narrow corridor, but there's hundreds of people everywhere you look. Now, the race starts at about 6:50 in the morning. That's when the pro men and pro women start. And then the age groupers, essentially anyone that's not a professional elite athlete, starts at about 7 a.m. Eastern time. Now, let me tell you about getting into the event, right? So you fly in 1 or 2 days before an event if you're going to something that's out of state or outside of your local area. And the reason for that is you want to get familiar with your surroundings. So I've been to Chattanooga several times. I already understand what the bike course looks like. I understand the swim and the run. I'm going there so I could really acclimate to the temperature and the humidity and start to get rid of any negative things that I've been carrying, right? I want to go into the race mentally clear and physically strong. And I got to also bank a little bit of rest, right? And so you get in on like a Friday, you go to check in either on the Friday or on the Saturday for the morning, right? So I checked in on Saturday because I arrived a little bit later in the evening. And what I do is I like to go check out the vendor booths, talk to different people there, and then also meet and greet different athletes as you're walking around, because you never know who you're going to run into. You could run into an elite athlete if you've been following them. If not, you might just stumble upon them, or you might find someone that's brand new at a triathlon. They're there for the first time. You could literally tell in their face they're nervous yet excited about what's going to take place. They've either trained a lot, a little, or some didn't really train much at all, right? And so sometimes we all fit in those different categories when we're going to do hard things, right? That's the reality. So when you get to the venue, you go, you check in, you take a look at what you need, how the transition area is set up, right? Because that's key. When you're doing a half, typically you've got one transition area, meaning that you're going to put your bike stuff there. When you get out of the swim, you'll take your wetsuit off, you'll put it there. And then when you're done with the bike, you'll have your bike back on the rack, and then you'll put your run equipment on, and then you'll go for the run, right? Now in a full distance, depending on where you're at, you may have two different transitions. And that's because you're not doing loops, you're usually doing, it's probably due to space. I'm sorry, it's probably due to space of where you could store your equipment and have it be watched, as well as where you will be on the course when you do that second transition, right? So within Chattanooga, it's a single transition area. It's different in the full as far as how it operates, but we'll talk about the 70.3, right? So you got your bike area there. You're going to have all your run equipment there in the morning. And when you're done with the swim, which is the first event, you'll put your wetsuit there. Now, the cool thing is within the first day, right? So I just checked in. I'm meeting a lot of new people. I've met some seasoned people. And then I go for a small bike ride. I want to make sure my bike ride is tuned up. I'll visit one of the bike shops there. If not, I'm going to do the tuning myself, make sure all the wheels the tire pressure is good, all the bolts are tight. I'm seated in the right spot, right? That way I'm used to how I've been training, unless I'm renting a bike for the first time down there. I've done that before too. And the reason for that is in a triathlon, especially an Ironman, you're going to check your bike in the day before the race, right? So that way, because you're getting up the day of the event so early, they don't want people pushing and moving bikes around because it's going to get very congested. It's dark. People aren't all paying attention early in the morning, right? Everybody's in a different mind, right? They're in a different arena as they're going through their training plan. Do I have everything? Do I got my nutrition? Do I got my hat? Do I got my water bottles? Do I got this? There's no sense in trying to corral all the bikes on the day of the event. So just know that when you check in for an Ironman, you're going to drop your bike off usually where the transition is. You'll know where your space is. So you put your bike there. Don't leave any of your other gear there, just your bike. And then obviously the day of the race, that's when you're going to fill all your stuff within that transition zone. So as I mentioned, the day before the race, dropped the bike off, had a great position within all of the racks. And so to put it in perspective, when you're doing the swim, you're going to run into the transition zone. You're going to take your wetsuit off sometime before you get to the bike, right? And then as you're running into the transition corral, wherever your equipment is based, that's where you got to run to, right? So for me, as I ran in, my bike was almost right at the beginning of the transition from the swim. So I had a very short run into transition. In other Ironman events, I was way over here. And so running my swim from the swim finish to where my bike was a lot longer. So that could wear you out. Also, you're running typically on asphalt or concrete or something, or a parking lot. Well, that could rip your feet up a little bit if you're running or walking. Anything's possible. So just keep in mind, wherever you're positioned, make a mental note of that, because that's going to dictate how much or how little you have to run when you come in and out of transition, because usually the in to transition is on one side, the exit is on another side, depending on where you're at within the three different sports that were taking place. So luckily at the swim start, I was up here right next to the entrance. Well, guess what? That's also where the run start is. So I could run, once I get all my gear on, I could run out pretty quick, which is great. Now, the bike start and finish is on the other side. So I had to put the shoes on, the bike shoes on, and then make it out of the transition to start the bike and then back. It was a little bit longer. I'm not that good at walking or jogging within bike shoes. And so I find that a little bit more difficult. I still did it, but just know that in transition, you're going to see different distances from the start and end of the event, or run in or run out, swim in, etc. And that could kind of change your plan, because you also want to think it's not just the three sports that you're participating in, you're also participating in two transition times, right? Going from swim to bike and then bike to run. That's going to be key, because that time is still calculated in your overall distance, right? And some people forget about that. They train for an event, train for an event, train for an event. They forget that there's going to be some time accumulation between those two transitioning of each of those sports. So let's talk about, so that was the day before. So essentially drop my bike off, and then I go have fun. I go play some pinball, I get some food, and then I crawl into bed at about 8 o'clock after I call my family. Now you're thinking, why are you crawling into bed so early? Well, the reality is when you're preparing for the event, you're going to get amped up, right? Your nerves, your excitement is going to go through the roof. You're going to have a higher level of adrenaline as you're preparing for the event, right? Mentally, you know it's coming up and you've prepared, and you're trying to fit all the pieces in your mind so they're aligned and you're ready to give it your all when that starting gun goes off and you get in the water. So the night before, I like to try to go to bed a few hours before my regular bedtime. I might have actually started to prep that a few days before. And the reason for that is I found, even in other events that I've done, you typically don't sleep well the night before because your mind is working overdrive. Did I forget anything? What is the plan? How am I going to act and conduct performance at this stage? And you're going through this mental thing. You might be thinking of other things as well, right? You might still be stuck on crap that happened in your life prior to the event, because we've all been there, right? But if you can, the night before, empty your mind of all those thoughts and just focus on getting some rest, because you're going to need it. Now, so I went to bed at about 8. Technically, I probably didn't close my eyes 100% and fall asleep till sometime around 11 at night. It's hard to try to go to sleep 3 hours before you normally go into sleep, right? But I just wanted to really decompress, have my body really relax, get my heart rate down, and just try to be as calm as possible, and not to think too much. And believe me, I couldn't turn off the thoughts, but there's a reason for that, is because you're going to get up probably between about 4 and 5 a.m., maybe a little bit sooner, right? Depending on how far you have to travel from your hotel to the start zone, or start of the race. That could dictate how early you have to get up, right? So for me, it's about 3 miles away. I had to drive there. So what I do is I get up at about 4 in the morning. In the hotel, I make my breakfast, I stretch, I take a shower, I put on all different kinds of chafing and sunscreen. Literally, I'm putting it on at the hotel so I could wash my hands because, believe it or not, I don't want to start having greasy hands before the swim, because when I get out, if I grab hold of my sunglasses for the bike or the equipment, my hands are going to get, all that stuff's going to get on there, right? I don't want that stuff. Trying to ride a bike for 56 miles with like finger marks of sunscreen, and it gets distracting, and it starts to deteriorate your focus, right? So you got to think ahead of that. That's why I do all that prep work right at the hotel, have my triathlon outfit on, and then I drive to the event. I'm there about 5:55, 6 o'clock. I find parking. I go to transition. And when you get to transition, this is your opportunity. There's a short window that you have, right? It's an hour to 2 hours, depending on what time you arrive, before they close transition, where no other equipment could be put in there. And this is where you're going to fill up your waters for your bike. So get your bike dialed. You put your helmet, your gloves, if you got any bike shoes, sunglasses, any nutrition on the bike, you'll have that right next to the bike. Now below, you'll usually have a little bit of space, probably about a 2x3, maybe 2x4, 2 feet, but not 2 inches, space underneath your bike, where essentially you're going to put your running shoes, probably your hat, a cooling towel, sunscreen, nutrition, acetaminophen or Tylenol, if that's what you need. Maybe if you've got contacts or glasses or whatever it is, right? You're going to have all the nutrition that you're going to take outside of what you may get from the course, including water or Gatorade, right there. That way, when you come into transition, you strip off what you're wearing or portions of what you're wearing, you put on your next equipment for the next event. So going from swim to bike, and then you go out there and then come back and then you do it again, right? So you want to make sure all of that is laid out first thing in the morning. Like I said, when you get into the triathlon mindset initially, you want to make sure that you have all of your plan established before you go to bed. That way, when you get up, you're not using a lot of mental energy. Did I forget this? Oh, I should have brought this. I should have done that. Because guess what? It's already too late. If you didn't bring it with you, you're not going to have it there if that's what you wanted. So keep that in mind. Number two, don't overdo it. I've seen people bring 2 or 3 bags and they got all this shit out there and they're changing like all different clothes, and that's fine if you have to do it. But the reality is you should be comfortable using your triathlon suit or swim or bike shorts and a top the entire event from start to finish. The only thing you'll probably need to change, if you really need to change them, would be your socks, right? From putting them on at the bike, maybe you change them when you go to the run, because running in drier socks is awesome, right? But that's it. You don't want a lot of other crap, because it's too much things that you got to consider, right? Too much. And believe me, you want to make sure that you have the least amount of decision making you need to make in those transition events. So that's a transition zone. Now let's talk about swim start. So at Chattanooga, it takes place at a place called the Boathouse. It's about 1.4 miles up river. You are in a wetsuit. I started a little after 8 o'clock, so I waited in line for almost an hour. You got to remember, they're getting about 18 to 2,500 plus people in the water, 3 to 4 people every 4 to 5 seconds. So you do the math. Sometimes you're going to wait a little bit depending on where you seat yourself based on your approximated time. Now, in the swim, I did very well. I had got a great glide when I'm doing freestyle, but for some reason, I just had a lot of congestion that morning, so I had a hard time breathing. I did most of the swim as the backstroke. And I was able to actually set a personal record by about, I think, 20 or 30 seconds at a longer distance than when I did 1.2. So if you think about it, I actually traveled faster and farther in a shorter amount of time. So believe it or not, I only trained twice the week before the event. The last swim I had was in September for the Chattanooga Full. I don't recommend anyone go out and attempt to do what I did. I'm a pretty good swimmer. I could float. I could fly. When it comes to gliding, and I could pick up speed very, very quick. So I have a very linear position in the water where I could literally glide farther than most people off of one stroke. And that's just years of being in the pool or swimming in the ocean when I was in California. But I don't recommend anybody just go out and try to practice 2 swims and then go try to do an Ironman. Unless you're prepared, unless you got some muscle memory and you've been doing swimming for quite some time, I don't recommend it. But I did it because of the things that I had going on prior to that. So, boom, I get out of the water. I don't even know what the time is. I could see on my watch. I don't know if it's PR at the time, but I run all the way in from the exit of the swim into the transition zone. Most people walk. Now, the second you get out of the water, you're going to cross what's called a timing mat. Essentially, this is recording the time that it took you from swim start to swim finish. Now, once you get over that finish, there's a little window of opportunity called the transition 1 time. This is when you make it out of the water, so after the swim mat, and then you get on your bike, and then you cross another mat, and that is the start of the bike transition. Now, like I said before, you want to make sure that everything in your transition zone is dialed and minimal to what you exactly need when you're out there. Any extra thing that you think you need, you probably don't need, right? Focus on what's mandatory, because this little window of time is calculated at the total time for your event. So you could potentially miss a cutoff. I've done that before because my transition time was like 15 or 18 minutes because I was like having conversations with like 20 people. I was doing dumb shit, right? This time my transition zone was about 7.5, maybe 8 minutes, maybe a little more. And the reason for that is I ended up sitting down and my feet were so waterlogged. I had a hard time putting on my socks. And then I made it one mistake. Well, I think it's a mistake is after I got dressed, I stood there and I ate something instead of eating while I was walking, right? You always want to be focused on forward momentum, even if it's slow crawl, because now you're getting closer to the finish line. While if you're just standing still, you're not really making any forward progress, right? So the time is just, you're just eating up time standing still. So, but other than that, one of the fastest transition times I've ever had in a bike anyways. Now out on the bike, Chattanooga is gorgeous, just gorgeous out there. You got a lot of rolling hills. In the 70.3, there's not as many spectators out there. For whatever reason, it doesn't draw the crowd that it does when it's the full. And that's probably just because of how far you have to go out when you're on the full. But I felt dialed on the bike all the way out to the halfway point, which is about 28, a little more than 28 miles. At times I was averaging 22, 23 miles an hour. Accumulated, it was about 19 and a half for the 2 first sections of the bike section. So, which is pretty good because normally, I mean, the previous years and previous event, I'm more in the 16, maybe 17 range. So I definitely made a tremendous amount of gains in the past few months, just hitting the weights and dialing my nutrition and weight in. Now, out there, passed a ton of people, had a lot of fun. There's only one spot on the way out where I just missed getting the right momentum to really get that roll up over these rolling hills where I had to struggle a little bit more. But overall, pretty impressed on that bike. Now on the turnaround, coming back, there was one section where there was probably about a 10 to 20 plus mile an hour headwind. And believe me, even though I was pedaling the same, I'm in the same gear, it felt like I was trying to push like 3 times the resistance. So my speed actually dropped to about 13 miles an hour. almost nobody passed me at that same amount of time. Everybody else was struggling because the wind is literally just coming straight into your face. And even if you're trying to get as low as possible, it's still acting like a sail, and there's a lot of resistance. But overall, coming through that back section, once we got into the tree line, my speeds jumped back up to about 18, 19. And then it was out to Chickamauga. And in this section, this is where I got caught up behind several cars and a tanker truck. And so you're on a narrow 2-lane road, and there's cars that are also on the road, and this at times can be dangerous in an Ironman, but it does happen. Is sometimes the cars, because where the community is, you have cars that are actually on the same road that you are at the same time. And they're slowly inching by because they're nervous because they see a ton of bikers. And so they're riding their brake, or they're going slow, sometimes going uphill. And it's very dangerous if you try to pass them, right? Because if you try to go to the left side on the other lane, you've got oncoming traffic, and you don't know if they're going to speed up or slow down. And you could just create a terrible situation for yourself and maybe other people that are riding near you, or even that person driving that automobile or that tanker truck, right? And so my speed slowed down going up the uphills, but at the same time, it allowed me to kind of rest my legs because I wasn't charging as hard, because I couldn't get around these 3 different obstacles that were traveling about the same pace as the people in front of me. I just wasn't able to make that until I was able to pass them in one section. And then we hit this awesome downhill leaving Chickamauga, hit 39 miles an hour in one section, and it was phenomenal. I was just flying by. I made up some time, but overall, I'm pretty happy. I shaved off about 20 minutes, 22 minutes on my bike time. So personal best number 2. Now, as we get into transition from the bike, I literally stripped off my helmet, kicked off my shoes, threw my shoes on, grabbed a cooling towel, got it wet, and I ate nutrition as I'm walking out on the course. I also did a pit stop in the restroom really quick. My transition time there was probably about 5 minutes or less. It's probably the fastest I've ever done because I did everything in motion, right? I wasn't trying to sit and do extra things. I even had a time to stop for some of the volunteers to put a bunch of sunscreen on my neck, which was great. And then when I jumped out on the run, out of nowhere, because my legs were all wobbly, I find myself running next to people up this hill, and we're doing about 7.5, 8-minute miles. I'm typically not an 8-mile a minute kind of person, right? Consistently, right? I'm more in the higher 8s, maybe 9s, low 9. But I find myself running. And the reason for that, and you'll find this if you've ever been in a triathlon, is, or in a marathon or larger, or 5K race, 10K race, etc. When you're next to other people, you could pick up on their energy, and you see that they're going fast. Well, you'll start to pick up the pace. It's not that you're competing with them. You just feel that that's the pace everyone around you is moving. So you just naturally start to speed up. Well, that lasted for about 2 miles. And then all of a sudden I realized I needed some nutrition. So at one of the aid stations, I grabbed a banana, ton of Gatorade, ton of water, some ice, and then I carried along. And so my run went like this. I'd get to an aid station. I never stopped and stood still. I kept walking, even if I passed something. If I had to go to the restroom, that's the only time I technically stopped. But I'd get into the aid station. I'd speed up. My pace would be way down here. And then as I get to the next aid station, my speed comes up, I grab stuff, and then boom, I'm back down again. So almost the entire time I'm running more in that 8-minute mile just because I'm trying to push myself, right? I have a mental goal that I want to hit. Don't know if I'm going to hit it, but I'm going to keep going. And the run was phenomenal. You're traversing along one of their highways, and then along the river walk across 1 or 2 or 3 bridges. It's beautiful down there. Now, I'll say this: when I finished running at about 10:13 pace, which is pretty good, especially after being on the course for multiple hours, doing swimming 1.4, doing a bike for 56 miles. So on the run, at the end, I set a PR. I shaved off, I think, about 10 minutes or so, which is phenomenal because I've been practicing the run and I've been in the gym. Now, my final time in the Ironman is 6 hours, 34 minutes, and some change. Now, you might be wondering, wow, that's not that fast. Well, if you think about it, the last 70.3 I did was over a year ago, and it took me 7 hours and I think 3 minutes. So this year, a year later, I knocked off 29, almost 30 minutes on a course that's slightly longer and more difficult than the one that I did the year before, which was Galveston 70.3 here in Texas. Now, the reason why I tell you that is over time, you can make incremental progress if you put in the work and you understand what muscles and techniques you have to focus on, especially if you're doing a triathlon, right? So, for example, along the journey that I've talked about in today's podcast, I've cleaned up my nutrition. I got into the gym. I really structured all of my training outside of swimming. Sorry, folks. All of my training to really build on heart rate and wattage, right? So increasing the watts. Now, I'll talk more about my thoughts of how to increase your bike speed because obviously 18 miles an hour over 56 miles. I forget how much elevation gain over the time. To some, that might be slow. To others, that might be fast. But I will tell you this, when I finished in 6 hours and 34 minutes and some change, I still had energy where I could keep running, where I could keep biking, or I could get back in the water, right? If you go back a few years, and even when I did either of these in 2021, when I was done, I was dead. My muscles were shaking, my mind was gone, my nutrition was spent. I literally was just writhing in pain and confusion and days. This time around, my recovery was about a day. And it wasn't even a bad recovery. My muscles didn't hurt. My ankle was a little sore because I've had an ankle problem in the last few months. But other than that, my cardio was fine. My heart rate went back together. I got a little sunburnt here or there. But that's the difference when you really start focusing on training is it's not just about the event. It's injury prevention and recovery. And so I am totally thrilled that I was able to complete an Ironman 70.3 in Chattanooga with a PR in the swim, a PR on the bike, a PR on the run, and overall PR in total time. And if I were to really examine my transition times, I think I had one or two of those. It was probably the fastest I've ever done too. But that's what happens when you put all the pieces together and you execute as you planned. You could exceed your ultimate vision of where you want to go. Now, I'll be getting ready for a different type of race. It's an ultra marathon. We'll talk about that in a few weeks. But as far as Ironman and triathlon, I will think about doing one others. And when that case comes in, I'll have a specific plan that I'm going to put in place. And we're going to try to hit lower on swim, bike, run, and overall in whatever distance that is, whether that's 70.3 or 140.6 for the full Ironman. Well, folks, thanks for tuning in. As I described today, we talked about my journey within 70.3 Chattanooga, what worked, what didn't work. There wasn't a lot that didn't work this time, believe it or not. Not to mention, I have more energy when I was done than I've ever had before in any of the other events. So that just tells you something right there. I could have went harder. I could have went harder. But you know what? I'm satisfied with the end result. And we're going to keep going because we have bigger and brighter and higher goals to get in different types of races. If you got any questions about the 70.3 Chattanooga Ironman, or you're interested in talking about how to start running 5, 10, 15, half marathon, full marathon, ultra races, reach out. I'm here to help you. We got custom plans that we could put in place for anyone that's interested in doing those activities. Until next time, remember, go out there, figure out what's going to ignite that catalyst inside of you, and make the change today, because tomorrow is going to be brighter than you realize. Take care, y'all.